Thank you, Pastor. It's great for me to be here again. I was here in 2016, I believe it was, and 2019. Hard to believe time has gone by so fast. Since then, I have retired, and I highly recommend it. I've been retired 3 years. I did actually 39 years with Bombardier, and a couple of years with CAE, and 45 years in the aviation industry. I've been with Creation Ministries International now for, you should be able to switch over our slides now. Switch to my presentation. Okay. Yeah, so I've been with Creation Ministries International now for, that's not it. Okay. I'm ready to go. So, yeah, you haven't switched over yet. Pardon? Somebody has to go. All right. Sorry about that, but yes, so I've been speaking for Creation Ministries International now for 11 years, and I've had over 200 churches across the country. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Alberta speaking at quite a number of churches. In 3 weeks, I go to British Columbia, a number of churches. I'm going to be in Chateauguay and in Lennoxville in Ontario, so they keep me quite busy. And I thought retirement was going to be easier. Plus, I'm also renovating my basement because of some flooding incident we had in Montreal. So anyway, anybody like to do putting on the walls, etc.? So, oh man, I'm tired of that. So today we're going to talk about amazing evidences for a young universe. And if you want to get mocked and ridiculed and laughed at, just tell somebody that you believe the biblical account of creation and the universe is only about 6,000 years old. I can tell you, you're going to get a lot of laughs and repercussions, and people are going to think you're not quite there. And so I've had a lot of experience with that. Creation Ministries International, we are in 7 countries. We have PhD scientists on staff. In fact, we just took on another speaker with a PhD in chemistry in Edmonton. We review the major scientific journals, and we produce the materials, a website, the resources which you have available outside here. You can pick up some of them. Speakers like myself travel across the country. The office is in Ontario, but I've been in all the provinces. In fact, I even spoke in Australia recently. My wife and I were around there. So now I could say I'm an international speaker. Right? Great. Anyway, we have an increasing presence on social media, and some of these YouTube shorts are very good, excellent resources. And we have a very powerful website, which is simply creation.com. It doesn't get any easier than that. Over 13,000 articles, videos, resources. It's got tons of stuff. And if you'd like to get our info bites, if you'd like to get our email newsletter, we're going to ask you to sign up for our Connect form. And so if you want to, ushers will pass them out. Just put your name, email address, and your postal code. Or if you're tech savvy, you can scan it on your phone and you can enter it on right on the computer. And if you write it on this form, please do so in English. Oftentimes it looks a bit like Arabic when the writing is there. Okay. So the world will tell you, they'll tell you that's scientifically proven that from the Big Bang about 13.8 billion years ago, we are now talking about the Big Bang Theory. 13.8 billion years, that's a long time. And what is the story underlying all of this? The story underlying all of this is naturalism. The idea that nature explains everything. There is no need for God. There's no need for the supernatural. We can explain everything through natural processes. Okay, that's the underlying presupposition behind the Big Bang and modern science. What about a global flood? Is there any place in modern science for a worldwide global flood? And the answer is no. In fact, it isn't even allowed as into discussion. And there's a reason for this. Okay, and we'll get to that later on. When we look at the fossil record, we see fossils in rock strata. So are there fossils in rock strata? Absolutely. Does that tell us that things lived and died? Yes, it does. And there were things that were eating each other. Okay? But the question was, how long ago was that? Was this billions of years ago? Or it was recently, within the last 6,000 years? Well, this is the question we're going to answer today. So when you look at the biblical account, it tells us that the earth was created by God about 6,000 years ago. We get this from the genealogies of Adam. Starting in Genesis chapter 5, it tells us that God had created Adam and Eve, and when Adam was 105 years old, he begot Seth. and the Genesis chapter 5, you go all the way on through there, you go to Chronicles and Matthew and Luke, you have the genealogy all the way from Adam to Jesus. Pretty much unbroken genealogy all the way. That gives us a creation date or time of Adam about 6,000 years ago. Okay? And so for many people, that's just way too recent, because dinosaur died out 65 million years ago, we're told. If you watch Jurassic Park movies, well, if it died out 65 million years ago, then obviously the Bible cannot be true. And this is one of the major reasons why belief in the Word of God has diminished, is because people don't believe it's true. That they don't believe that God actually created according to the biblical account. And so you have a lot of problems with people who are believing the Bible, and because they don't think scientifically it's been proven to be false. It's not only the secularists or the atheists who are saying this. This is many Christians themselves who are saying that this biblical account of origin is wrong. There's a video put out by Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, The Shocking Origin of Young Earth Creationism, which is what we're advocating. So Michael Jones got over 250,000 views on it. He's saying, this is byline, says, this is the history that young Earth creationists do not want you to know about. So we're going to talk about it, okay? The truth of what Christianity has believed about the age of the earth and creation has long been forgotten by a recent rise of young earth creationism. In reality, there is a lot of evidence that prior to the 1960s, most Christians believed the earth was much older than 6,000 years. Now, if you would think that a guy like Michael Jones, he's a very smart guy, he's got a lot of good things on his channel, except he would have gone to creationist organizations like Creation Ministry International, Answers in Genesis, and to the Creation Research to do some research with them, because these have the PhDs in this topic. If you look at his sources, none of them were counted. Okay? In fact, what he believes is that this young earth creation idea is a new invention by a guy by the name of Seventh-day Adventist, a Canadian creationist, George McKeedy Price. He thought that it started with him about 100 years ago, and we've all just caught up with this idea. And that historically, this is not the case, he said. But actually, he's actually dead wrong. Okay? So we go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the first English language general encyclopedia in existence. In 1771, they gave the date of creation and the flood, along with the other date, many other dates. Okay, we zoom in a bit. When was the creation of the world? About 4007 BC. And the deluge and Noah's flood about 1656 years after creation, about 2351 BC. Now, this is Encyclopedia Britannica. This is in the British Empire. So I responded to Inspiring Philosophy. This online. It says, quoting from Dr. Walter Ernst Mayr, the Darwinian revolution began when it became obvious that the earth was very ancient rather than having been created only 6,000 years ago. This finding was the snowball that started the whole avalanche. By Ernest Mayr, by his The Nature of Darwinian Revolution, Science, 1972. Ernst Mayr was perhaps the greatest evolutionary scientist of the 20th century, according to PBS. If the church did not hold to a young earth, 6,000-year view in the time of Hutton and Lyell, what then was the avalanche that Myers is referring to, if not the revolution that attacked a young age? Right? That's what Myers is saying. He said up till that time, the church in Western civilization was predominant. Okay? And the church's teaching was that God had created about 6,000 years ago. Okay? But now Lyell and Hutton and Darwin came along and said that's no longer true. And so this started the avalanche. And now today is the idea that the earth is 6,000 is mocked and billions of years old is accepted as the norm. So I want you to read something about, from the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 8th edition, which came out in 1860. It says this: regarding the commencement of the existence of humanity on the earth and the subsequent period of which may be called its infancy, the mere memory of humanity is necessarily at fault. In other words, people don't remember that far back. Okay? Two kinds of external information are depended on for filling up the blank. The information contained in the biblical records of the creation and beginning of the race, and collateral information to be derived from geological researches. In short, history at this its first stage is merged in theology and geology, and the historian must have his conclusions given to him from beyond the field of his own science. Even so supplied, the conclusions are not numerous. Hitherto, scientific geology has not even professed to be able to determine anything precise respecting the epoch at which the earth was first inhabited by man, or respecting the conditions of its first human inhabitants. In other words, up until the mid-1800s, Western civilization believed that God had created according to the biblical account, and the universe was only 6,000 years. But the claims of geology said, we don't like that, okay? We're going to object to that, and geology has what was started this avalanche, this revolution. And one of the proponents of that was a guy named Charles Lyell, who was a professor of geology at King College London. He published his first scientific paper in 1825. Lyell was planning to write a book with radical new views for geology. Radical because they were contradicting the Bible. He set out to prove, now notice this, he set out to prove that all geological processes were due to natural events rather than supernatural events. Up until this time, the formation and processes of the earth were attributed to God or another higher being. Lyell was one of the first to propose these processes actually happened very slowly, and that the earth was extremely ancient rather than a few thousand years old, most Bible scholars proposed. So the idea that the earth is millions or billions of years old is the new idea, not the other way around. Charles Lyell found his evidence when studying Mount Etna in Italy. He returned to London in 1829 and wrote his famous work, Principles of Geology, a 3-volume set, which Charles Darwin happened to read on his journey around to the Galapagos Islands. Perhaps the most important idea to come out of the Principles of Geology is uniformitarianism. The theory states that all the natural laws of the universe that are in existence now existed at the beginning of time, and all changes happen slowly over time and added up to larger changes. This was an idea that Lyell had first gotten from works by James Hutton. Okay? Uniformitarianism. This is the ruling paradigm in science, particularly in the geological sciences. This is very important because that means that there were no supernatural events, and there was could have been no global flood. So if you go to academia and submit a scientific paper that postulates either supernatural agency or a global flood, you wouldn't be allowed to submit your paper, simply because the presuppositions don't allow it. But let's jump over to what Jesus viewed. Whether it's Adam and Eve, creation, Noah, the flood, Jesus affirmed all of these as real, historical people, places, and events. He never viewed them as stories, myth, allegories. And people were listening to him, thought, yeah, we understand it, the real history, where nobody was thinking, oh, maybe it's billions of years old. Not like that. So what impact does this have on theology? We all know, if we read the Bible in the beginning, that God created in 6 days. We believe these are 6 normal, regular 24-hour days. But God had said that when he had done so, it was good, very good. God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was good. But, of course, you know what happens next. The serpent comes along and tells Adam and Eve, did God really say? Can you trust God? And, of course, as we know, Adam didn't trust God. He said, God, I don't trust you. I said, I believe this snake over here. I believe what he's telling me is true. And unfortunately, that started the bad thing. This started the fall of man. All right? So, everything was very good until the fall. That means that there was no death, no disease, no suffering, up till the time Adam started this whole mess. So now what do we do, if it's been very good, with all those rocks and strata and fossils which claims to be millions of years old? Could it have been there before Adam? But if it was there before Adam, how can God say after, when he creates Adam, it was all good? When literally Adam and Eve would have been standing on the remains of creatures and lived and died by the quadrillions prior to him. How could God say, this is very good? You're standing on a literal genocide of everything, right? So obviously that's not what the story is. The story is that it was very good, it became very bad, and all of those subsequent things that are bad, burial, death, suffering, and disease, is subsequent, is afterwards. So that all of this must have taken place in the last 6,000 years, right? Everything. The entire universe, 6,000 years. So, first it was Adam, everything was good, then there was Adam's sin, which made it not so good, and then after that you have judgment, the global flood. What would the global flood have done? Well, it would have buried a lot of things, buried them and fossilized them. Okay? And that's what we see. All right, well, what about, some people say, well, you creationists have different evidences than the evolutionists. Actually, that's not the case. Here, for example, is a piece of amber with an insect in it. Okay, we picked it up actually in Tallinn, Estonia. Okay, now, I went to the proprietor selling it for 30 euros. It says, how old is it? He looked at the card, 60 million years old. I said, how do you know? That's what the card says. Okay, how does he know? Right? He doesn't know. We just selling this stuff, right? So, okay. So if I was now many people think, oh, it's 60 million years old, fantastic, I'll pay 30 euros. But I'm thinking, no. You can make this within, actually, if you go online, you can actually take amber, melt it, put an insect in it, and it will, you could say at 60 million years old, I made it yesterday. Right? You actually could do that. All right, so it's the same evidence, it's the interpretation thereof. And different presuppositions that you bring to the table depends on how you're going to interpret the evidence. So, for example, Charles Darwin is epitomized man's belief. This is, Charles Darwin actually, theory said, it has to have nothing to do with God. It could have been because his 10-year-old daughter died, and maybe that's what had turned him against God, I don't know. But first off, there is no God, therefore only natural processes. And uniformitarianism is the natural process that guides all of that stuff. And of course, he had read Principles of Geology. And there was no global flood. Why not? Because a global flood would have accelerated by orders of magnitudes those geological processes. You've heard about continental drift. Allegedly, the continents have been moving apart from each other at a very, very snail's pace. But in a global flood, they would have been moved very, very quickly. Instead of a continental drift, it would be a continental sprint. Okay, so that would have changed everything. So if in naturalism or in Darwin's worldview, you were neither God nor the flood. But in the creationist point of view, we said, yes, obviously God's involved. He created everything, so a supernatural agency. Yes, there are natural processes. God set up natural processes. Gravity and chemistry and all these things are created by God. Okay. Also, there are catastrophic events. We know that because of the global flood and many others since then. And of course, one of the greatest catastrophic events is the global flood. Okay, so different presuppositions, what you bring to the table depends on what you're going to see as far as the evidence goes. Okay, now in our society, this is all that's allowed. Sorry, it's not a case of, if you even discuss it online or anything like that, they're going to mock you. You're stupid by believing other than what we tell you. But a pure scientific endeavor is looking at all sources of evidence, not just, I only like this, the ones I like. You should be able to be unbiased. Isn't that what science is supposed to be? Objective, unbiased. We don't care about your feelings. We just look at the evidence. Well, in order to do that, you have to look at all the evidence, not just say, oh, sorry, can't look at that. Okay, so let's look at all the evidence. Okay, so some of the evidences that support a young world or an old one. Now, there are many, many of them. These are just, we could talk about the Big Bang briefly, rock strata, fossilization, organic tissues, oil formation, Greenland ice sheet, and cave of crystals. Okay, so if you go to creation.com/age, creation.com/age, 101 evidences for a young Earth. And since you can and there's many more. In fact, there are far more evidence that suggests the universe is not billions of years old. You're never going to find something which says exactly 6,000 years old, but it will say it's definitely not millions or billions of years old. Okay, so let's look at the Big Bang. We're told as a fact that 13.8 billion years, first there was nothing, and then everything came into being the size of a singularity, like almost nothing. Compact, held together by such gravitational forces that it was like a pinhead. And yet somehow that pinhead blew up. Why? No, Nobody has any clue or any explanation. All right. So, but from that beginning, we are here today, 13.8 billion years ago, through a process of cosmic, chemical, biological evolution. Okay. Did anybody ever see this? No. Nobody ever witnesses. This is the story about the past. But if you have to have a story about the past without God, you have to come up with something. And this is one of those stories. It's just one of the stories. Okay. But how solid is the Big Bang? People are saying, oh, you're absolutely, we have the evidence, etc. Well, I suggest that's not the case. Here's an article from the Toronto Star. Canadian scientists take aim at Big Bang theory. Rather than starting with the boom 13.8 billion years ago, universe may have existed forever, Canadian academics suggest. What, no Big Bang? Wait a minute. And here's another one by the Journal of Physics and Astronomy, Roland D., whatever his last name. The Big Bang never happened. A conclusive argument. Wait a minute. It never happened? Well, then what was there before? What was there? It's called the steady state theory. Prior to the 1950s, that was the reigning idea that the universe had always existed. It didn't have a beginning. It was always there. Except that they came up with this idea. We don't have time to go into it, right? And what about this? An article in 2019. The universe may be billions of years younger than we thought. Let's knock off a couple billion. What's a couple billion here or there, right? The last sentence here says, it is difficult to be certain of your conclusions if you use a ruler that you don't fully understand. Right? There's a cosmological constant, okay, that has something to do with that. And here's one that I really can't grasp my head around, where, you have the astrophysicists, the brainiacs, the ones with the quadruple PhDs who study all of this esoteric stuff about the origin and quantum theory. Here's one: our universe should not exist. CERN antimatter study confirmed. CERN is that collider, nuclear collider in Europe. Okay, so wait a minute. You're telling me that after all of this study, okay, and everybody, all these people with doctorates are saying that after we've done all our research, our conclusion is the universe should not exist. And yet, what do you do with this? It says we really shouldn't exist according to best current physics. All they want now is more funding, because obviously they didn't get the answer they wanted, right? But the problem has to do with during the initial event, there should have been equal amounts of antimatter created along with the matter, which should have canceled each other out, which means we wouldn't be here discussing it, right? I don't know what to do with this, right? And what about dark matter? Dark matter. Oh, what is this dark matter? Dark energy makes the vast majority of material in the universe, except nobody's ever seen it, can measure it or test it or taste it, right? It doesn't, nobody knows. It's something, it's what they call a fudge factor. It fills in the blank. We need all this gravity, but we don't have enough gravity from the regular physical material, so we're add up stuff. We'll call it dark matter. You can't see it. It's a magical stuff. Okay? If dark matter doesn't exist, then the story of how stars and planets formed is mathematically impossible, because there isn't enough gravity to do the job. If there isn't any dark matter, it disproves the Big Bang cosmology. And what does it say, dark matter? New Scientist in 2019, we still haven't found it. And how about this one? Another one. New research puts age of the universe at 26.7 billion years, double the current estimate. This is from a guy up in the University of Ottawa, right? Professor Gupta. Right? Wait a minute. You go from nothing to cut a few billion to double it? Just about anything you want to happen with the Big Bang. But my problem is this, is there are many Christian apologists who go around and say things like this. The Big Bang is one of the greatest proofs of the existence of God. Lisa Childers, Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, they all believe in the Big Bang. All these things. Except that in the Big Bang, even in the secular cosmology, it's in a state of, we don't know what's going to happen. But when the Big Bang disintegrates, what then happens to one of the greatest proofs for the existence of God? Instead of being a faith builder, it will be a faith destroyer. Because you don't hang your hat on the Big Bang theory, you hang your hat on the Word of God. That's the only place that we can, the Word of God. Jesus said, God's Word is truth. That's it. All right, what about these things like the Grand Canyon? Grand Canyon, if you've ever been there, this is actually an awesome canyon. It is Very, very grand. So, unfortunately, the slide, it's about 466 kilometers long, and it's about 6,000 feet deep. If you go to the interpretive center, they will tell you that it's taken 2 billion years from the rock at the very bottom to accumulate to the top. And in those layers, now these particular ones, you'll find all these, this is what's called a geological column. You may have seen that, where from the earliest forms of life at the bottom till the later ones at the top. All of this supposedly taking billions of years. The question is, did it take billions of years to form? How do we know? Did anybody see it? So again, if you're using natural processes without God, you have to say this is, well, how did this form? How is it likely to have formed? Now, the sedimentary layers covers 75 to 90% of the Earth's surface. Sedimentary layers are all these rock strata. You see them all over the place. Okay, if you drive through Kingston, you'll see them on the side of the road. Lots of strata. Fantastic. Awesome. So in 2019, my wife and I were in the Canyon lands. Okay, it's awesome. And that's my wife and I. I'm on the right. Okay. Anyway, so you see all of these sedimentary layers. And if you look up very close, it's called varves. These are very, very fine laminae or little layers. Okay. And so they're very, very close. How do you form these? How does it form? Well, actually, I've been looking online to find out scientific explanations for sedimentary rock layers. They just say it formed one on top of each other. Okay, so let's be specific. Okay. Well, the idea was that there was a flood. Now, some of these layers go hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. Some of them go across the continent to under the sea over to Europe. These strata. Okay. So how was it formed? Well, there was a flood, they say. A flood then put a little layer of, after water evaporated, a little layer of dirt. And then the next year or so, there was another flood which put a little layer of dirt. That's how you get all these little layers. Well, think about that. Has anybody ever seen that happen? Anybody seen a flood do that? Put a little layer over hundreds of thousands of square kilometers? Nobody. Never happened. Okay? But here's one case where maybe explain it. So if I have a lot of water and I have dirt with moving water along, the water moves all this debris and soil and dirt, etc., and it will automatically sort into layers. Now, the quality is not the greatest here, but you can see that they started from the white at the baseline there, and you see all the layers build up. This is hydrodynamic. As water moves along, it automatically sorts this into layers. And how do we know? Well, we can do it in a laboratory. We can test it. Okay. How else can we know? Well, here's one that Creek tells. That's not me leaping. It's not my wife either. Anyway, so when you look at this, calculating the Grand Canyon, estimated average layer buildup about 1 foot in 300,000 years, according to this 2 billion year time span. Okay, 1 foot, 300,000 years. Wow, okay, that's very, very slow. But one of the things is what you don't see. What you don't see is any erosion. How is it possible when you say you have flooding year after year after year after year with no erosion? How is that possible, right? Anywhere you go, when the water's got to run off somewhere, and as it runs off, it creates channels, it creates canyons, etc. What you should see is tons of these channels. In fact, but between the layers, you don't see any roots, you don't see any trees, you don't see any, just all this varves all stuck together, hundreds of feet thick. Here's one example. In Missouri, there was a steamboat Arabia. Now, it was a paddle wheeler on the Missouri River in the 1800s, and these were wooden hulled. And as you can imagine, every now and then they'd hit a rock or a stump, and they'd get a hole and it would sink. So it was carrying a lot of household goods. And somebody thought, well, we know where it sank. It's been marked on the map of the river so that nobody else runs into it. And it sank in the river. Maybe we can excavate it and take out all these household goods. So some American by the name of Hawley decided to do that. And so they went looking for, this is in Kansas City, Missouri. And so they said, well, looking for a riverboat, where do you think it would be? In the river, right? But it wasn't in the river. It was half a mile from the river. Why? Because the river meanders. It changes shape. So I actually found it in a farmer's field using a proton magnetometer. I have no clue what that is. But anyway, they found it. The farmer says you have one season to get it out, the winter season. I finished you can have the field, and so that's what they did. And these are pictures of pictures. As you can see, they're digging, and finally they found it underneath, and this is what it looks like. Now, because the water table is so high, they had to keep pumping the water out all the time. But what I found very interesting, if you notice on the sides, right? You notice on the sides, all these layering, right? But how long was it? Well, we know because it was 132 years, get 45 feet underwater, okay? 45 feet in 132 years. So am I going to need billions of years? No. I just need a lot of water and a lot of dirt, right? Which is exactly what you would expect in a global flood, which is going to move a lot of dirt using a lot of water, okay, all around the earth with tsunamis and things. It's fantastic. Okay, that would explain it. But the slow layer upon layer upon layer build up over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, billions of years, it doesn't work. What about this? This is rocks have been bent over 90 degrees. How do you bend rocks? Now, technically, theoretically, it's possible that you can very, very slowly bend rock. But that's not what the story is here. You'll notice a car in the bottom. This is Namibia, and there's a truck at the bottom. And you'll notice that this is about 200 feet of layers all bent together, which means that they must have been bent together. And one of the things you don't see in the bending. Now, if you ever tried to bend rock, you can try it at home if you like, right? It's going to shatter. It's going to crack, splinter in a whole pile of gravel. You don't see this. In fact, this is what I'll talk about in a movie that is Genesis History did a movie specifically to analyze this topic. Okay, so obviously they must have all have been in a state where they were plastic, able to be formed. So these layers were all laid down together, and then they were all bent together. Because otherwise you'd have one layer laid out, goes 90 degrees, sticks up in the air. The next year, another layer lays out, goes 90 degrees. Doesn't make any sense, okay? So here's some other set of these folding rocks. All over the world you see these folding rocks, indicating that through tectonic forces, the plastic sedimentary layers were bent and twisted and shaped. Here's also in Forillon National Park in Gaspé. My wife and I were there. And you can see here's a rock almost 120 degrees bent. How do you bend it? So is Genesis History, Del Thackett did a previous one, it's actually on Netflix, but this one mountains after the flood. So they were looking at the microscopic level, do we see fracturing of the layers at the bend? Because if it weren't plastic, if it was rock hard, then you should see all of that. And the answer is no. They found that there must have been plastic as they were bent. But actually, excellent resource, I think we have it here, is Genesis History, Mountains After the Flood. What about this? Polystratic fossils. Now, when you look at that, you might think, what am I looking at here? You can see the hammer to the bottom of that tree trunk. That tree trunk is rock. That's what fossilized. You can see a root coming off at the bottom left. Okay. So in a place called like Joggins, a UNESCO site in Nova Scotia, Joggins Beach, you can actually see the face of a rock, and you can see these things. So I went there about a number of years ago, part of one of my talks in Nova Scotia, and I had a tour, and I'm saying, I'm looking for these polystratic rock fossils. Yeah, he says, but we have the tides come in, the highest tides in the world come in all the time. They beat against this rock face and break everything down. Right? So over time, what you see here is going to be down on the ground, broken up into pieces. I said, oh, man. Well, we have this little one over here. I didn't take that picture, but little ones. But I'm thinking that every year they're losing. The guy said, you see that house over there on the cliff? When I was a kid, he says, that was about 100 feet from the cliff's edge. Now that house has to be abandoned because it's almost ready to be gone into the ocean. Right? Showing how much the coastal erosion, which is another, well, wait a minute, if 100 feet in your lifetime, if this is billions of years old, the coastline would have been on the other side of the earth, okay, right? So how do you explain this? So if you're an evolutionist, you think all these layers, as you see here, horizontal, take millions and millions and billions of years to form, But how can that tree remain standing over this long period of time? Even if it was 1,000,000 years, are you telling me that that tree stayed vertical while millions of years of layers built up around it, and then it turned to rock? How does a tree do that? Right? We have trees maybe 4,000 years old. That's the oldest tree we've got. Definitely not millions of years old. The explanation is that this was buried in a flood. The tree remained upright, the flood came around, and because the roots were heavier, it stayed upright, and then the rock layers and the tree all fossilized together. That make sense? Perfect. So when somebody goes to the Grand Canyon, there it is. You ask the question, how can you prove that this strata requires a long time to form? When we will be able to see this rock strata form, I didn't mention Mount St. Helens, that's another one. We don't have time for that. But when we can actually hear Mount St. Helens strata, this was formed in a day. Right? So tell me, why should I believe it takes 2 billion years? You just made this up. Not that you ever saw this. It's a story you're telling. It's not real. What about fossils? We've all seen fossils. And there are millions, actually, been about 2 billion fossils have been collected so far. Okay? Most of them are marine creatures. Here's a clam. Here's a clam. It's a fossilized clam. One of the things, it is closed. What does that tell you about the clam? What does it tell you? It was alive when it was buried alive and then became fossilized. Why? What happens to a clam when it dies? It opens up. If you ever eat clams, okay, make sure that they're open. Don't try to eat a clam that's closed, because then it would have been dead and probably contaminated, okay? So this indicates that this thing got buried alive and turned into fossil. That's how it happened. All right, so what about fossils? How long does it take to form a fossil? Well, if you have kids or anybody, so National Geographic, if you look at National Geographic, it'll tell you how long does it take to form. Preserved remains become fossils if they reach an age of 10,000 years. Ah, man, we don't have 10,000 years to work. I only got 6,000. How am I going to make a fossil? It takes 10,000 years. Did National Geographic ever see this happen in 10,000 years? Of course not. So what we're looking at is a fern. A fern is a plant. Okay, you can actually eat ferns. And this one is a fossilized fern. In fact, it was so quickly fossilized that you can see in the inset cell division. And as you know, once you cut a plant, okay, it will start dying pretty much as soon as possible. All right, keep it in the fridge to make it slow down, but eventually it's going to decay. So even New Scientist, where I got this, it says the plant was almost instantly fossilized, preserving it in incredible detail right down to its individual chromosomes in various stages of cell division. So this New Scientist says that National Geographic, you say it's 10,000 years old, but that's just a story you're making up. We admit that it takes almost instantaneously. Here's a fossil of this is a picture of a lady who had a fossil octopus. You see the fossil octopus on the right here? And she painted using the ink from the fossil, reconstituted that ink with water and painted that picture. But there's several things it tells you. One is obviously, if it's 95 million years old, how come the fossil looks exactly like a modern octopus? How is it possible if you have evolution that doesn't happen? Right? So, and it looks like a regular octopus. Okay? Obviously, there's nothing happened. And what about jellyfish? Charles Darwin had said, you will never find a fossil of an invertebrate, that is, creatures without bones. So jellyfish, an octopus, he says you're never going to find a fossil. Why? Because if it takes a very long time, jellyfish or whatever will decay almost very quickly. If you've ever been on a seashore and you see a jellyfish, the next day you come back, it's mush. Okay, there's not much left. Well, these are fossil jellyfish. Okay? So obviously, fossilization must have happened almost instantly. So I was in Blue Beach Fossil Museum in Nova Scotia, up along the, heading north from Halifax, and I stopped at this place. And the guy had a piece of rock on his table, about this thick, about this wide, and it had all these dimples in it. I thought, this is very interesting. And I said, this looks like raindrops. He says, yes. I said, well, this must have then turned into rock almost instantly. No, he said, it took millions of years. A little while later, I was asked to leave. So, right, because I was arguing. I mean, you're looking at this thing had been turned into these dimples from raindrops. You admit, it must have been instant, right? Anyway, because his thinking would not allow that. Even when he looked at it, he couldn't accept that. Here I have a fossilized teddy bear. Okay. 3 months prior, this had been a soft, cuddly teddy bear, and in England, they put this under this waterfalls, and over 3 months, it'll become a hard rock. Right? How long does it take to turn something into rock, which is what fossilization is? Millions of years? Maybe Fred Flintstone was playing. Okay. Anyway, some of you don't remember who that is. And these fish. Fishes are, here's an ichthyosaur, marine reptile in the process of giving birth. Now, if the marine reptile, this thing dies, okay, for whatever reason, and it may be a birth process, what happens to it? It starts to decay. It starts to be attacked by other creatures, going to eat it up, right? But yet there's nothing there. And you look at the fish in the bottom. It's almost perfectly preserved. It's in the process of eating another fish, which is also perfectly preserved, indicating it must have been flash fossilized within matter of a very, very short period of time, because you can see all the very, very fine details of fish. And if you don't believe fish decay very rapidly, then just take a fish at home, leave it on your counter, and you're going to find out that there won't be much left. So, how can you prove that fossils require a long time to form when we actually have scientific evidence to show that they can form almost instantly? What about dinosaur DNA? You may have heard that before. So in 2005, a Dr. Mary Schweitzer was digging through some unfossilized Tyrannosaurus rex bones, and she discovered this organic material. I think the last time I was here I showed this as well, but it never gets old. Certainly not getting millions of years old. But so she says it's flexible and resilient when stretch returns to its original shape. She was actually interviewed by, I think, Barbara Walters on ABC, and an hour-long show talking about it. Excuse me. And she said that they are virtually indistinguishable from tissue samples from modern species. And she says, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. We 100% agree with her. However, when she initially presented it to the scientific community, they said, Dr. Schweitzer, this is from your own admission, from a dinosaur, from a Tyrannosaurus rex, which, by the way, was not fossilized. How can you keep bone unfossilized for millions of years? Doesn't make any sense. Okay, so they said, Dr. Schweitzer, we know that organic material cannot remain undecayed for that period of time. Even if you freeze it. Try freezing some steak in your fridge after 5 years. What do you think it's going to be like, right? Not very good. Okay, so obviously you have something wrong with what you've done, because there must be contamination, biofilm, somebody switched something on you. I don't know, but we cannot accept it. So she did all these experiments to all the protocols you're supposed to do in the lab, and cleanliness, etc., and came back. She said it's the same thing. And finally, the scientific community had to accept it. There was a special on National Geographic on dinosaurs where they mentioned that. And they said, well, guess what? It can remain undecayed for 65 million years. How is that possible? Again, because they have to have an explanation which does not have anything to do with God. Right? So if you have to then start twisting science to fit your presuppositions, which is what they claim creationists are doing. Or you twist the Bible to fit your science. It's not our science. Now, ironically, Dr. Mary Schweitzer is a theistic evolutionist. She does believe dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. She says that young Earth creationists take her information or what she's discovered out of context. They're misusing it. I don't think we're misusing anything. You're presenting your finding. Your interpretation we disagree with. Right? She claims that she's a Christian. She even has a Bible verse on her office, and that shows it's her bona fides, that she's really a real Christian. Except that what she doesn't, she's blind to the fact of what God's Word says. Of course, on the practical side, how long do you think that she would maintain her position of respectability in the academic community if she said, I believe that dinosaurs lived thousands of years ago? The reality is she wouldn't have a job very long. Or she could come and work for us. Okay? Which, in actual fact, I remember Dr. Robert Carter, he's a PhD in biology, and he loves everything genetics. He loves it. He just eats and breathes it. But he says, I could have had a job in industry, but I chose to work for Creation Ministries. And I know how much money I have not gotten. I've had to give up, right? But he says, I do it for the Lord. That's my ministry for Christ. Okay. So, can you prove that organic material can survive for millions of years? Anybody done that? No. Dr. Schweitzer's trying to. So far, I think she's got about 5 years under her belt, maybe 10 years, to prove that it can. She's trying to get iron oxide, but to prove a million, she's got a long way to go, and I ain't waiting. Okay. How about fossil fuels? So much about fossil fuels. How does fossil fuels form? Well, underground, it says National Geographic, over millions of years under high pressure and high temperature, the remains of these organisms transformed in what we know today as fossil fuels. Okay, so obviously it's going to take a while. We don't have millions of years. How can it form? Well, actually, under certain conditions, laboratory conditions, you can turn organic material into crude oil in under an hour. Under an hour, that's right. Physics.org talked about a chemical reactor turning algae into crude oil in under an hour. Stuff that you could refine for jet fuel, car fuel, etc. So when somebody says it takes millions of years, it's not because anybody has actually tested this or observed it. It's just a story that's been made up. When actually the scientific evidence, you can make it in an hour. And what about stalactites and stalagmites? Anybody's been spelunking, cave exploring? We've been in caves in Nerja in Spain and in the middle of the state. You see these stalactites and stalagmites. Nobody can remember which ones are which, going up from top to bottom. Anyhow, so they tell you that these things take hundreds of thousands of years to form. Don't touch that, sir. If one breaks off, it's going to take forever to form. I don't think so, because even in Montreal we have them. According to the Montreal Tourism website, some of the central tunnels have been completely transformed by stalactites and stalagmites, making them look more like alien worlds than old sewers. These are abandoned sewers. And as you can see, this is a complete top-to-bottom stalactite, stalagmite. So how do you know it takes hundreds of thousands of years to form? We can have them in less than 200 years. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, a few more. What time do we have? How long did you give me? When's 45 minutes up? Okay. All right. A few other things. In 1942, there was some aircraft flying from Canada over to England, supported the war effort, and they landed had emergency landing on Greenland. Now, the pilots, everybody survived. They knew where the planes were. In fact, they took a picture of it. And they thought, well, somebody thought, well, maybe I can recover these old planes, right? They were just sitting there and they're slowly being covered over by snow. So they did some estimates of the Greenland ice cap, which ties into global warming, if you'll note. They say roughly it's about 100,000 years to cover about 2 to 3 kilometers thick of ice on Greenland. All right, so at that rate, they calculate that it's very, very slow, about 6 centimeters per year on average of ice accumulation. So 6 centimeters, it's about this much. So it's been there for maybe 70 years, 70, anyway, let's say 3 meters. So they figured that it would only be about 3 meters deep. So he got some of his shovels and pickaxes, and they started chopping down to see 6 meters. They kept on going, however, and it turned out to be 85 meters or 278 feet deep. Wait a minute. Whoa, our calculation's way off. What happened? Well, just by simple math, if it's 285 meters in 70 years, roughly 1.7 meters per year. 1.7, let's say 2 meters per year, it's gone down. Now, actually, they did get the plane out. But what happened was, okay, so as you can see, 2 to 3 kilometers, or 2,000 to 3,000 meters thick, if you go down, if it's almost 2 meters per year, that only takes me less than 2,000 years to accumulate the entire thickness of ice on the Greenland ice sheet. You follow? Right. Now, there are some twists to the story. It's actually on creation.com, etc. But actually, the rate of increase of snowfall and ice is 28 times faster than they estimated. Right. Eventually, they did get it out there. And actually did get it flying. And it's flying in air show of the United States. All right, now last one. Yes, really fun. Yeah. So I came across this. I was going on the net and I thought, "Boop, the Nika Cave of Crystals is a giant problem for a young earther." All right, wow. Since I'm a young earther, right, I thought, I got to read this. Naturalis Historia. It says, initial estimates of the age of the crystals range from hundreds of thousands to millions of years. Young Earth proponents cannot accept the long history of these crystals, but rather believe they must have formed within the past 4,300 years. Yes, since Noah, Noah's flood. They are found in a cavern that sits above layers of rock that they believe were laid down by a global flood less than 4,500 years ago. Correct. Hence, they must believe the cavern itself is of recent origin and the crystals inside the cavern even more recently formed. Okay, that's true. That's what we would believe. But according, if you go to BBC Earth, around 26 million years ago, and very slowly over hundreds of thousands of years. Well, obviously they are not a young Earth organization, okay? But what's the deal here? So there's in Guadalajara State in Mexico, there's a mine. They were digging down the mine, and they came to these crystals. They're large gypsum crystals. Okay, some of them over 65 feet long. Okay. The temperature there is 58 degrees Celsius, so it's very, very hot, and as long as they're submerged, they continue to grow. But they pump out the water from the mine so they can work down there, and they've been pumping it out. Now the explorers went around there, looked at it. It had special air-conditioned suits. It could only last an hour or something like that. And actually, it's on, if you go into Amazon Prime, it's actually about that is on there, okay? It says the only reason humans can get into caves today, however, is because the mining companies' pumping operations keep them clear of water. If the pumping is stopped, the caves will get submerged and the crystals will start growing again. All right, so all this time they've been underwater, they've been growing. And what's the assumptions here? Now, they flooded the mine. They got the pictures, now they flooded the mine again. Okay, so what's the assumption here? The assumption has to do with how fast crystals grow. And how fast do crystals grow? Because they're saying it took hundreds of thousands of years to grow these 65-foot long or 13-meter crystals. But how fast do crystals grow? Well, if you have these... Sorry, I got that. Right? You can have crystals grow overnight. Right? Here, you could do this. You can make a nice little, tea lamp holder or an ashtray. I mean, probably not an ashtray, but right. So here's the University of California, Los Angeles, wanted to grow a crystal for experimentation purposes. This took 2 months. 2 months. Think about that. If they kept on going, in 5 years, as long as it takes to finance a car, you could have the same length of crystal as in the Nika Cave. Right? So these guys say it took hundreds of thousands of years to form. I don't think so, because we can actually, in a lab, prove that the crystals can happen very, very fast. So, all right. So we talked about these aspects here. And, of course, it fits in with the Bible, because God had made everything good. Adam's sin brought the fall, brought bad things into the world, and the flood, and everything that happened bad is after that. All the burial, all the fossils, all the rock strata is within that time period since the creation event. Okay? All right, so what can you do? Well, going to recommend resources. I've given you very high-level stuff. There's lots more. There's lots of resources, DVD, etc. But one of the things we're going to encourage you to do is sign up for Creation Magazine. Okay? This, especially if you have children, this is what you'll want to get. Or if you have grandchildren. By the way, we have now 7 grandchildren, right? Yes, thanks to our kids. Okay. So Creation Magazine comes out 4 times a year. It informs and builds faith in the accuracy of God's Word. It's our publication, so the guys in Australia, they produce articles for that. No paid arbit, and actually it's a physical copy. And it comes out 4 times a year. Total of $30 a year, comes paid 4 times a year, and it's $7.50 every 3 months. Total of $30 a year, which is very, very affordable. And you get a hard copy in the mail, and you also get digital copies. Okay, some people like it on their computer or stuff like that. Okay, and if you sign up today only, folks, you also get a free back issue of the magazine and a free $14 DVD. Okay, as a sign-up bonus, as a special gift from us to you. Okay. All right, very simple. There's a form. Sign the bottom one so you can tear it off. If you sign the top one, it means the other two are no longer used. Okay, sign the bottom one and tear it off. Okay, fill out the front side and then payment information on the other side. It's okay. Pass the clipboard on when you're done with it. It's just a piece of paper. I think so, yeah. Yeah, you can do it online. Yeah, there's no QR code, no. Yeah. Okay, some resources. We're going to mention this. 60 of the most often asked questions on creation and evolution. The Answers book, very popular level. If you want one book that you want to take it home and have it there for a quick reference, this is the book. If you want a theological, scientific book, the Genesis account, anybody have this? All right. I'll say it was free per pastors, by the way. Okay. You already got it? Okay. You can also buy another one. This is the book. It's got scientific stuff, theological, any question on the first 11 chapters, and was free for pastors. There is also a Bible study curriculum. 12, did you go through it? Okay. Okay, well, somebody's gone through it. If you want just the scientific stuff without reference to the Bible, this is it, Evolution's Achilles' Heels. It's our PhD scientists showing how the weaknesses of evolutionary theory. There's also a DVD, and if you buy both, you get a discount. And some of you might be saying, listen, I only have $199 to play with today. I'd like to get all of these resources. You get all of these resources for $199. It's $360 worth of resources for a low price. I also want to mention that Creation Ministries International is a faith-based organization. These resources and talks do not make money. Okay? In fact, sometimes we lose money on doing this. So if you would be willing to donate to Creation Ministries International, we have envelopes. I can donate directly to the ministry. Anyway, God bless you, and thank you very much.
It was awesome. Thank you so much, Gus. That was just awesome. So we have some envelopes from Destiny that we'd like to hand out for you to give a love offering towards Creation Ministries so that they can continue this great educational studies on all of these things, and they can go from church to church, and we can bless Gus. Would you like to do that? So we have some envelopes, and then if you send it through Destiny, you'll get a income tax also. So whichever way that you'd like to do it, that's fine. So we want to bless you. Thank you so much, Gus. Thank you. Testing, 1, 2. Okay. You have a question? Somebody has a question. Yes.
You have a question? Maybe I'll stand. Are you still on streaming? No. Okay. All right. You mean any particular fossil or all the fossils? I don't think the microphone's on here.
Testing, 1, 2. Yeah.
So fossilization, by definition, is a rapid process. That doesn't mean that all the fossils were made during the flood, but you have to bury what it is. Okay? So you can actually create fossils on your own. You could. Actually, there was a guy who was at the International Conference on Creationism in Ohio, and a guy had there display of fish fossils. He had made them at his home in under a week. By certain materials, under high temperature and pressure, he was able to turn these fish into fossils.
And those, let's say that someone took that fish fossil, they examined it. They say, oh, it's similar to 300 years.
Exactly. Exactly. In fact, it was done, I don't have the place, I think it was under Smithsonian. In a lab, they took some lizards, okay, and they put them in a process, I'm not exactly sure what it was. Within 24 hours, they fossilized it, and under an electron microscope, they could not tell the difference. So they said, it's not like the these are fossils. They put it in air quotes to imply that they weren't real fossils. But in fact, they were real fossils, right? They just didn't want you to think the same as the real ones, which are millions of years old, right? But you can't tell. They were electron microscope. You can't tell the difference, which is down to very fine detail, right? Yes, you can't tell the difference. No. Any other question? Yeah, you can see that piece of amber. So there's a little story behind that piece of amber that if you watch the Jurassic Park movies, it's kind of based on that, where there was a piece of amber which had a mosquito in it. Mosquito apparently had taken some blood from a dinosaur. They got the dinosaur DNA, mixed it with something else, and then you had 3 movies or 4 movies where scientists doing things they shouldn't. But this one, I said to the guy, he says, it's very shiny I said, it's very polished on one side and very rough on the other. He says, oh, what they do is they heat it. By heating it, it smooths it out. Then it gets colder. So I thought, is it possible to take amber chips, piece of amber, in a crucible, heat it up, put an insect in it, and wait till it cools? Yes, you can do that. Wow. So it's even experts are unable to tell the difference between a natural one and a man-made amber.
Wow, they cannot tell it, really. They cannot tell the difference.
Can't tell the difference.
Because of course they make it fake, because they sell scorpion amber things, like obviously it's not 2,000 years.
Well, it's just tree sap, right, which is hardened. So knowing this, well, knowing how you can make ambers, you have a whole industry. Okay, so. Anybody want to see the fossilized teddy bear? If you feel the nose, it's got a little bit of the fuzz still on it.
3 months?
3 months.
Just water falling on it
Yes,
constantly.
called a petrifying well in Mother Shipton in York, England.
And if they,
Yeah.
and if they looked at this under like what is that?
Electron microscope?
How old do they think it is? Based on
Well, look at the teddy bear. How old do you think the teddy
Nobody
bear?
uses the texture, not the
Yeah, well, I can't tell. You can making something out of rock is very, very fast. I mean, this is calcium carbonate or limestone. You can cover something. There's a picture of a ladder someone put there, covered in rock. Covered in rock. Well, it can't be millions of years old, so it all depends on the amount of minerals and evaporation rates and things like that.
That's the place where people put so much stuff, and it's just packed full of stuff.
Well, it's on in England. It's hanging on some ropes. So yeah.
But can it be any waterfall, any
No. It has to be special waterfall. High calcium carbonate, which is limestone, dissolved limestone, and it's more of a concretion. It just fills up all the pores with this limestone, and eventually it hardens and dries.
You can take mortar and plus this with water and it can just form into this.
Probably. Yeah.
Mortar, you can get it from around the
Yeah, you could.
less than 10,000.
Yeah. I actually got this in England. I went there to get this. So.
How can you pay for the books you buy?
Credit card, cash.
Over there, perfect.
If you want to pay cash or credit card, buy your books.
Yeah.
My wife is there with the machine. Carbon dating. I would not debunk carbon dating. No. Carbon dating is a useful tool, right? But carbon dating will never go into millions. So carbon dating is one tool, but it has limitations and it has assumptions. So I have a whole, yeah. So it can be useful, but up to a certain age. Beyond that, it starts to go off like around an